Okay, hello folks, and welcome back to what I think is tutorial number 3. Oh, actually, it says right there on the screen. Yes, tutorial number 3 in this little series, looking at how you can start your research into the home forces of the Second World War. So, in this tutorial, we're just going to start to have a very basic look at what's termed an order of battle, and start to kind of consider war diaries as well. So I'm not going to focus too much on war diaries. That's going to be something for more of a next episode. But I'm just going to do a brief overview of like something to do with war diaries at the end. So yeah, so we're starting to get to the point now where we're going to start to identify the units that made up the home forces in your local area. And these are going to be units of the regular territorial army as well as potentially Commonwealth forces and free forces. So the focus of these videos isn't on the Home Guard whatsoever. It is on the, let's say, the professional armies that were deployed within the UK. Mainly because they get very little attention and very few people have actually done any research into them. So yeah, we're not going to look at the Home Guard in any way, shape, or form during this series. Anyway, or especially not in this video. Right. So, as always, this project and this tutorial video series was very kindly funded by grant funding from the Norfolk and Norwich Archaeological Society. So, as always, I'm very, very grateful for them for funding not only my research but also as well allowing me to um, produce these videos as I research the anti-invasion defences of Thetford. So, like I said, that's kind of the journey that we're going to be following later on when I've got some war diaries to share. So please do check out the Norfolk and Norwich Archaeological Society. Obviously, if you do have any ideas for archaeological projects or historical research projects, then do check them out. And yeah, they are well worth checking out and seeing what they're up to as well. So again, thank you to NNAS for funding my research and this little video series. So, where are we going to start? So we're going to start with basic orders of battle. So an order of battle is a military term and a historical, well, it's now used by historians as well, that is literally just the order of units that made up a military formation. So these can be very, very complex. What we're going to do in this little video is just outline a relatively simple way of starting your basic order of battle. And it's worth me mentioning now, as I've mentioned in the other videos, that there is no kind of like easy way of doing this research, and orders of battle and the home forces and their organisation is massively, massively, massively complex. So complex that each time I either start a new piece of research or have a look at a new war diary, my mind is completely blown by how detailed the information that's provided in, for example, the war diaries is. This is a little example here on the screen showing a very, very basic order of battle to division level for Norfolk in July 1940, and this is kind of like one of the jumping off points for my research into Thetford as a very specific area. But we'll look at this in more detail shortly. So, before we get into orders of battle, I'm going to do a run through of the kind of basic order of battle of the home forces, but your general organisation of a military unit in the British Army. And obviously this information filters across to the Commonwealth forces and the free forces in terms of organisation broadly. This generally doesn't apply to, well, very broadly applies to other military units, but this is very specific on the British Army. And you can see from this flowchart that took me a long time to put together because it's a right pain. But let's start at the very top. So right at the top you have the General Headquarters, GHQ, of the Home Forces. So this is the overall commanding unit of the Home Forces responsible for defending the UK. So right at the top, within the GHQ, you had a General Officer Commanding, or GOC, who was usually a general in rank. And throughout the Second World War, there were several commanders-in-chief of Home Forces, which is the official title of the officer commanding the GHQ Home Forces. So at the start of the war, you had General Walter Kirk, who was in place from the outbreak of war up until mid-May 1940. He was replaced by General Ironside from mid-May 1940 to the end of July. Ironside was then replaced by General Alan Brooke. Alan Brooke was promoted in December 1941, and he was replaced by someone who I can never remember the name of, so on and so forth. So yeah, this is the specific military unit responsible for planning the defence of the UK in its entirety. The way that military orders work is that, orders are issued from, in this case, the GHQ, and that filters down through various echelons of the military infrastructure and architecture. And this is one of the reasons why we see so much variation in terms of how these orders were carried out at a local level. So the national picture is relatively well known, but it's massively generalised in terms of the much more detailed story. So each command, as we'll see in a second, administered these orders in very different ways. Anyway, so your GOC, or the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces, in this case, he was accompanied by staff officers who supported him in making his decisions and his plans and administering them and doing the general admin. The Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces was also responsible for the General Headquarters Reserve, which was a body of 2 units located further inland, and these would have been the last line of defence, even though the Home Guard gets that moniker nowadays. And the GHQ Reserve and various other units were under the direct command of the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces. And then you also get things like Royal Engineer units attached to the GHQ Home Forces who were planning and building major defensive stock lines like the GHQ line, for example, which had a shelf life of 2 months, and various other admin staff. So in a very broad sense, right at the top of the kind of tip of the spear in terms of the command of the Home Forces, and your order of battle right at the top is the GHQ Home Forces, primarily consisting of the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces. So, below the Home Forces, or GHQ Home Forces, you have commands. So commands are, well, the whole of the UK, in particular England, well, mainly England, was split up into several commands. So these are kind of administrative boundaries established to break down this, the administration of defence at a local level. So these generally comprised of several counties or several areas, and England in particular was split up into various commands. So these were Northern Command, Eastern Command, Southern Command, Western Command, and then you also had Scottish Command as well. After December 1940, Eastern Command was split into Southeast Command and Eastern Command, which created an additional command, which is worth noting if you are kind of based around the Kent area and parts of East Sussex, for example. And this was an additional command that came into being towards the end of 1940 and is well worth being aware of. So, yeah, your command was generally responsible for, several areas or several counties. In terms of Northern Command, which is the one I'm better acquainted with, this covered Lincolnshire, all of Yorkshire, parts of Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, well, I've already mentioned Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Northumberland, all the way up to the Scottish border, parts of all of Tyneside as well, as an example. So it's worth getting acquainted with, after the Home Forces, the GHQ Home Forces, that the country was divided into several commands, and it's worth being aware of where these were and their general boundaries that they were operating in. Alongside the commands, you also had districts. So London itself was split up into what was termed a district. So this is like a localised area. And Northern Ireland also had a district. There was also an additional administrative command that is worth a mention, which is called Aldershot Command. And this was a training command. So this was responsible for training troops in the Aldershot area. So yeah, as I've already mentioned, these are generally counties that all bunched together and coordinated by an officer, often a general, so a GOC, General Officer Commanding, and his staff. And you also get additional units, including engineers and support units, so like things like farriers and veterinary services, even dental units and things like that attached at the command level, and Royal Artillery and various other things. But the idea of this is just to give you a very brief overview. So, below your command level is where things just about start to get really complicated. So below your command, you have generally 2 corps. A corps is pretty much an administrative unit responsible for supporting 2 divisions in the field. So a corps was generally responsible for, let's say, on average, 2-3 counties, give or take, depending on how big the counties were. At the corps level, you get Corps Royal Engineers attached, artillery units, units responsible for maintaining vehicles and all that, as well as sometimes you get Corps Reserves as well. So again, today the key perception is or the belief is that all the defences and defenders were completely static. That's not true at all. Especially from corps all the way down to battalion, there were mobile elements responsible for counterattack. Anyway, at the corps level, there were reserves, sometimes an armoured brigade, for example, that were attached to the corps and would undertake counterattacking duties across the corps' area of responsibility. So, as I've just mentioned, a corps was responsible for supporting 2 divisions in the field. And at your division level, things get massively complicated, and I don't expect you to kind of comprehend this straight off. A division is massively complicated, and I can't. I've been doing this for 20 odd years, and I still can't remember what units comprised a division. I just can't remember it. So, division level is things where things start to get really complicated. So, a division comprised of 14,000 soldiers at total strength. The division was the key unit for defending specifically a county, or generally a county, depending on how big the county was. For example, Norfolk was defended by the 18th Infantry Division from 1939 all the way up until the end of 1941. So your division comprised of infantry brigades, which are kind of like going to be your key focus in terms of research in the Home Forces. Within the division, you also had Royal Artillery Field Regiments, which were the kind of organic division artillery units. You have Royal Engineer Field Companies, at least one anti-tank battalion or one anti-tank regiment attached to the division. You also have a recce regiment or battalion, and a whole lot more. There are a massive amount of units within the division, which is why they are comprised of 14,000 soldiers during the Second World War. So below your divisions, then you have 3 brigades. So again, each brigade is kind of complicated, but things start to filter down in terms of how complicated things are. So each division, as I've already mentioned, comprised of 3 brigades. Each brigade consisted of about 3,000 soldiers and officers, give or take. So, yeah, these brigades are worth being aware of. But we'll cover them in kind of more detail later if I've got any examples of war diaries, or if I need any examples of war diaries. But generally, a county, for example, or a sub-county level would be split into, below the division would be 3 brigades. Try and keep this straightforward. So each brigade was was comprised of 3 battalions. Each battalion comprised of about 800 to 900 soldiers at full strength. And yeah, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail with the battalions because I'm going to highlight some resources where you can find out more about these. But yeah, your battalions generally comprised of infantry and some elements of artillery, for example. And it's worth pointing out here that war diaries, which are kind of like the key records relating to the Home Forces, were kept down to battalion level. You don't get anything kept below battalion level. Battalion level is the lowest kind of echelon at which you will find documents relating to, because the battalion war diaries generally comprise of everything else within that battalion. So it's worth noting that when you are searching for war diaries, as we'll see in a future video, you're going to be looking at your command broadly. Sometimes we're not going to look at that in this series of videos, but generally you're going to be looking at command, corps, division, not maybe brigade and battalion, but your battalion war diaries are where you get your most detail out of. But again, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. I should cover this in more detail in a future video. So below your battalion you have 4 companies, so each battalion comprised of 4 companies. This is where the British Army kind of differs from other militaries, in that most other militaries have 3 companies, but the British Army has 4. A company comprised of 150 soldiers split into 3 platoons, and the company often had additional elements such as carriers and transport elements and various things like that to support its operations. Yeah, so below the company level you then get to your platoon. So a platoon comprised of about 30 soldiers in total, with a small headquarters element comprising the platoon commander and his sergeant, and sometimes you have like some runners attached to that. The anti-tank rifle for the platoon is generally attached to the headquarters section, and sometimes you get a 2-inch mortar element as well attached to that. So yeah, your platoon is a relatively small unit, but worth being aware of in terms of defence. And like I said before, you don't get war diaries kept at the company level. So yeah, your platoon, again, no war diaries kept at that level as well. So each platoon is further subdivided into sections. So um, these aren't squads. That's an American term used by the American Army. In the British Army, it is section. It's worth pointing that out because the American terminology seems to be used for everything these days, and it's not historically accurate. So, your section comprised of about 8 to 10 soldiers, depending where you are in the war. Sometimes as many as 12 later in the war. But in 1939-1940, your section generally comprised of about eight soldiers. A section often comprised a section commander, so who's usually a corporal. Then you get a section second in command, usually a lance corporal. You get then your light machine gun element, which was a Bren gunner, number one, who was the gunner, and his number two, who collected ammunition and fed the gun with ammunition, and then 4 to 5 riflemen as well. 5 if you include the section second in command within that. So this is your very kind of basic structure that you'll be witnessing when you start to look at the war diaries. And like I already mentioned, war diaries are only kept to battalion level. When we start to do our research, and if you do start to do your own research, then you're generally going to be dealing with division and battalion war diaries. Sometimes brigades, if you want to go to that level of detail, but generally you're going to be focusing on division and battalion, potentially corps and brigade. But when we go through this video series, we're going to have a primary focus on the division and maybe the battalion, and then I might give you some insight into corps and brigade. But when you're getting started, you want to try and keep it as simple as possible because, as you can see from this hierarchy here, things are relatively complex. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend that you focus on a specific area, because if you extrapolate this across every single command across the country, there are a vast number of units, and no one person is ever going to be able to research all of these in the required detail to get information out. So, in terms of, let's move on to where you can start. So, I was very busy a couple of years back, and as I started to do my research using documentary sources, I thought, as always with this stuff, that I want to try and impart what I'm learning onto other people so that they can learn and try and kind of avoid some of the mistakes that I've made and get off to a good footing in terms of finding information. So, I recommend having a decent read through these resources I put together. So I put together the Home Forces Resources, snappy title, for the UK Second World War Heritage group, which I run with Peter Hibbs. And the aim of these resources is to provide a detailed overview of the structure of the Home Forces, kind of like what I've done now, but with more detail. And provide you with information about local units up to the division level as of July 1940. So the aim of this is to give you a head start when it comes to starting your own research and informing members of, the aim of this was to inform members of the public to show that it's not all home guard everywhere. There's a vast amount of units from the professional armies deployed across the UK. But yeah, a kind of additional thing with these resources that they'll save you a lot of time in identifying local units. It's worth mentioning here as well that prior to and after July 1940, there were a lot of movement of divisions, reflecting these units would have been really difficult throughout the space of the Second World War. And time consuming for me to put together. So I focus on July as a kind of set date when units were relatively static. So, for example, my research into Norfolk now has flagged up 3 or 4 divisions which I weren't aware of that were deployed to Norfolk during the Second World War, and it's kind of like I'm kind of snowballing with this and picking up different divisions I want to look at, but I've got to be focused on Thetford as a specific area. But yeah, these resources will give you a very decent introduction to military organisation and find that bits of piece of information. And like I said, these resources will give you the foundation for your research that you'll need to start your local research at a local level. And will save you a massive amount of time. So yeah, please do check those out. I recommend working through the introduction, reading all the information, and getting your head around organisation and where units were within the country, in particular looking at your local command, for example, and local corps, and then onto your division, so you get an idea of who was where in July 1940. So next up, if you're really serious about doing this to a professional level, then I recommend also getting a copy of Joslin's Order of Battle, Second World War, 1939 to 45. Sorry, Orders of Battle, Second World War, 1939 to 1945. So this is by Lieutenant Colonel H.F. Joslin. I think it was published shortly after the Second World War. In fact, I've got my copy here. Oh, it is a heavy old book. You know, you've got God knows how many pages. 600 pages in this, but this is a vital resource if you are serious about researching this period and researching the units that comprise the Home Forces. It's also a key resource if you're wanting to look at other units as well elsewhere outside the Home Forces, so I do recommend that. So yeah, this is an order of battle for the entire British and Commonwealth forces during the Second World War, which is why it's a nearly 700-page book. Worth noting that it doesn't cover the Germans or anyone else, it's just the British Army. So this is a vital resource for researching the units that comprise the British and Commonwealth armies, and also, most importantly, the Home Forces in terms of our research. So yeah, if you are serious about this, I recommend a copy. I think it's about £30–40 for a reprint, but it's well worth having. It is an absolutely fantastic resource. Um, yeah, so as the Home Forces resources cover things down to division level, you'll need a copy of Joslin to start to work out things from a subdivision level. So start to work out what units made up a division, what units made up a brigade, what units. Oh yeah, worth pointing out as well that it doesn't cover the units that made up corps. I haven't found a source that covers that, but if all else fails, check out Wikipedia to have a look into your corps in more detail. And although Joslin doesn't cover the corps, everything else it does cover far outweighs this as a as a negative. So yeah, when you start to look into your divisions, Joslin is the easiest way of doing this. It will save you a lot of time and effort in terms of building up the picture at the subdivision level. Yeah. So next, right. So starting your order of battle, you want to start things simply. You know, if you are new to military organisation, then you want to try and keep things as simple as possible. So you want to cover everything from command down to your local divisions. So the way I start my little orders of battle is I use a Word document, and keeping a record of and a basic order of battle will help you in the long run. So this will help you to keep track of the units you need to research, and also later on as we fill this in a bit more, it will help you keep track of the documents that you require to source to learn more about the units that formed the defence of your local area. So personally, I just keep a very simple Word document, and I have 3 colours which I use to highlight the various units, and this gives me an idea of. So I use green for war diaries that I've sourced. I use orange or amber to keep track of war diaries that I've ordered through my researcher, and then red to highlight sources of information that I need as a priority. Because when you start to look through this and you start to look at the documents, you'll be able to work out which things are a key priority and which things aren't necessarily. You can prioritize those later. So you want to have a think about prioritizing your research. So yeah, as I've gone through Joslin and I've used the Home Forces resources, I've got Eastern Command in there as the overall command. I might look into them in the future, but currently they are not a priority in terms of my research. So I might have a look at the command files and the war diaries associated with them. So far, 2 Corps have been particularly interesting because I've been looking into I'm going to look into the Chief Royal Engineer and the Commander of Royal Engineers in 2 Corps eventually. And using I think it was Wikipedia or something like that, or another source online, I've identified the Royal Engineer Field Companies that comprise 2 Corps. So these are going to come in useful in the future for identifying potentially the units that built the defences of Thetford. But this is going to be a long trawl, and way down the line I need to tie down which of these units were there where. So yeah, under your kind of key titles, you want to make sure these are highlighted and stand out, and then fill in the information of the units that are underneath those. So obviously underneath the Corps, in July 1940, we had the 18th Division, the 52nd Lowland. The 18th was soon superseded by the Norfolk County Division and the 76th Infantry Division. So this represents this movement of divisions. And yeah, like I say, these were kind of underneath the Corps. So using Joslin, I've then been able to identify the brigades that made up each division, along with the Royal Engineer Field Companies, which would have built the defences within the division area, and the Field Park Companies as well. Field Park Companies weren't necessarily doing the building; they were responsible for procuring resources. But it's worth being aware of them just to be on the safe side. But your fields, Royal Engineer field companies, are worth keeping a track of. Obviously, you might have a different aim in terms of your research, so you might want to keep track of anti-tank units at the division level, for example, or Royal Artillery units. My key focus is purely identifying the infantry units and the Royal Engineer Field Company units, which will hopefully in the future allow me to identify who was building the defence in Thetford. So I just keep this as simple as I possibly can to start out with. Eventually, I'll add in the brigade. So already I've got an idea of which brigades were where. In the next video, we'll probably have a look at how to trace brigade war diaries, for example, and add that to our order of battle. But yeah, starting off, just keep it as simple as possible. Have a look into these divisions. You know, if you want to look into the division histories, for example, it's worth doing, just get a bit of context into where they were deployed and things like that. So don't rush this stuff. Keep it as simple as possible because it's easy to overwhelm yourself with the vast amount of information that you are going to find. Things like the Norfolk County Division and 76th Infantry Division in this example, I've only identified after receiving the 18th Infantry Division and the 52nd Lowland Division war diaries recently. So you're probably going to find that you'll add to this order of battle as you start to actually look at the documents. So some of these things you aren't going to necessarily work out through Joslin and the Home Forces resources, but they offer you a starting point to start with. So I hope that has made sense. Let's just have a look at some final thoughts. Right. So, as you already know, I'm sure, by watching these videos, we're on part 3 already. The reason I'm putting these videos together is to share my knowledge and give anyone interested in starting to research the Home Forces a head start. It's taken me 20 years to get to this point, and I've only relatively recently started to look at the period documents, and I'm very keen to share this information to help people get a head start when it comes to research, because this research is so vital and it's very few people do it, that it's much easier, if I kind of talk people through how to do the research. So I'm very keen to share my knowledge and expertise, and I'm hoping to save you a lot of time if you do want to go out and research this stuff. I want to save you a lot of time and effort in gaining the necessary skills you need to do your own research. That being said, you need to remember that if you are new to this subject and new to military units and their hierarchy, then it is going to take you a while to get your head around these things, and you just have to have some patience. It will take a while to get your head around the hierarchy. And like I say, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I still struggle to keep track of how many units are in a division. I can generally work from section to company off the top of my head and still can't get my head around division and brigade and all that. It's also worth noting that it's best to do your own reading in terms of and research into to gain a good understanding of how units were comprised, and it also helps to have a good understanding of military strategy and tactics during the 1940s. In fact, I'm just going to quickly, before I forget, flag up another book. For a decent overview, I recommend the British Army Handbook. Oh, the cat's going crazy, by George Forty. So yeah, get a copy of this. This is an absolutely fantastic book and will cover pretty much everything you need to know. It is quite in-depth and complex, but you are very serious about undertaking such research, then you need to become a specialist, essentially, to do this research effectively. So take the time to build up your skill set. And kind of, oh yeah, just to mention here as well, if you are very serious about doing research, I recommend having a look at my Remember the Regulars reading list, which I'll link in the link below. This will cover additional books and sources of information that you might find useful for your research as well. But the key thing here is to get these books, get these sources of information, and actually read them and understand them. I am massively surprised quite often how many people say they own, like the key pillboxes text, like Henry Will's book and the book by William Foote, the Beaches, Fields, Streets and Hills book that he wrote, and how many people kind of brag about owning these books but then don't seem to have actually read them, which I just find very odd. So you need to actually read these sources of information and understand them rather than just saying you own them, anyway. A key thing here as well, by starting to build up your own local order of battle, this will give you a much better grounding in research as you'll be building up the list of units that you need to investigate. And for example, with me, building up this order of battle makes the information get absorbed by my brain much easier. I find that the information just kind of soaks in really quickly by building up this order of battle. So create your own. It's much better than just copying and pasting what you see on the internet. It'll give you a better understanding of yeah, how to do things. So, finishing off as always with what we'll do next time. Next time we'll actually start to take a look at how to find the key documents you'll need to identify, so the war diaries and command files. I did say at the beginning of this video I was going to cover war diaries, and I've realised I didn't put anything in. But anyway, let's do a quick bit on war diaries while I'm still here. Right, so your war diaries are the key source of information that you'll consult to get information about the home force in your area. Each unit, from the corps all the way down to the battalion, kept a regular war diary. This often comprises an actual diary which outlines the events that happen on a day-to-day basis, as well as standing orders and various other massive amounts of information that you'll find useful. And then alongside these you get your command files, and these are files relating to specific commands, so they cover more administrative things and broad strategy things, but we'll look at them in a later date. So when we go on further, we're going to be focusing primarily on war diaries as a source of information, and in the next video I'll show you how to find these using online sources of information, and we'll have a look at how to identify these and how to update your order of battle. So as always, I hope you found that interesting. I've been Chris, and I'll see you in part 4 next time. Thank you and goodbye.